Writing and Literacies podcast. My name is Gemma Cooper-Novak.
And my name is Alex Corbett.
And today we are talking with Dr. Grace Player, Dr. Mónica González Ybarra, Dr. Dywanna Smith, Dr. Nora Cisneros, and Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown. We're specifically sharing this space with this amazing group of scholars today to celebrate their special issue in Urban Education Journal titled The Unapologetic Literacies of Girls of Color. This vital collection of articles and reviews works to center the brilliance and literacies of girls of color, GOC. This issue builds on generations of critical scholarship and coalesces around an incredible collective of 18 women of color who contributed to this project. So to begin, we'd love to invite you all to introduce yourselves and share how you all came to be together in community.
Thank you for bringing us together here to continue this work and continue the conversations. I'm Dr. Grace Player. I'm one of the co-editors of the issue along with Dr. Mónica González Ybarra. I'm an assistant professor of curriculum and instruction at the University of Connecticut. And my research is really focused on the ways that girls of color mobilize their race to gendered cultured literacies towards envisioning and creating futures that, belong to them and celebrate them.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Mónica González Ybarra. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so my work looks at Latinx youth broadly, but this kind of strand has continued to unravel for me, looking at the literacies and knowledge production and kind of feminist practices of Chicana and Latina youth, looking at them through like a Chicana feminist perspective, women of color feminist orientations. And so really being in community with my sisters, mentors who are looking at the experiences of girls is like really pushing me to think about that.
Good morning, Panolte. Thank you for the invitation to this wonderful space. I want to briefly acknowledge that I am joining all of you from the Tongva lands of the Hauta village, otherwise known as Compton, California. My family and relatives are with us in this space, including my young ones listening. And so thank you all for this invitation. I earned my PhD a couple of years ago from UCLA in Race and Ethnic Studies in Education. I'm currently a mother scholar, a lecturer, teaching many students writing-based approaches to ethnic studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And much like Dr. González Ybarra, my research broadly is working with Indigenous, Native American, Chicana, Indigenous migrants as well on their college higher education access experiences, specifically focusing on the practices, the mentoring, and the writing that helps them approach and enter those spaces from a position of being active agents in dismantling white supremacy within those spaces and questioning how the universities often engage in precarious relationships with Indigenous people. So from a really active standpoint, and that's all done through a lot of writing. So thank you, it's great to be here.
I'll jump in and go next. My name is Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown. I grew up in Park Forest, Illinois, born in Chicago Heights. Currently, I am the chair and MSU Foundation professor of the Department of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University. My life's work is dedicated to creating knowledge and making art about Black girlhood with Black girls, homegirls, and non-binary geniuses. I've done that work since 2006 through the development and creation and ongoing organizing with Soul Hot, and that stands for Saving Our Lives, Hear Our Truths.
And greetings, my name is Dr. Dywanna Smith. I am an assistant professor at Claflin University. I'm standing on the shoulders of so many Black girls and women right now who are just keeping me uplifted, keeping me sane, and keeping me focused on my purpose. My research centers on understanding differing identities, and specifically race, gender, and body size, and how we interpret the body, how we read the body, and how that can be limiting and not liberating at all. Currently, right now, my work is focusing on writing for liberation and writing for Black joy, just period, since writing is such an often a traumatic things within classrooms. So trying to find and create and nurture joy and love wherever we can.
Yeah, I think just like listening to everyone talk about their work, it just moves me every time. And I think it speaks to so much of our kind of origin story, you know, how we came together. You know, Mónica and I met, as well as Dywanna, one of the other authors in the issue, Tracy Flores, as well as many of our mentors who are on the collaborative piece, through Cultivating New Voices for Scholars of Color, which is a fellowship through NCTE for early career scholars of color. And, you know, I think that for me, it was really coming together and seeing my sisters, seeing my elders doing this work that was so dedicated to the lives, the beauty, the genius, the creation of girls of color, Black girls, Indigenous girls, Asian girls, Latina girls, you know, and non-binary kids, you know, and thinking about that and seeing how much beautiful stuff there is and knowing how much beautiful stuff there is just as a product of being a once girl of color. It struck us kind of in our conversations going on and on and on about where was this work in the academic field, you know, it is so beautifully popped up. And when it is, it's just like an eruption, right? And it's just like such a beautiful connection. But we thought, and Mónica and I kept on talking, like, how do we bring this to fore? How do we do work that makes us feel happy, that makes us feel joy, that makes us feel powerful within this field that so often feels like we're not allowed to do that, you know, that we have this messaging that oftentimes we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to celebrate who we are, the girls that we live and work with. And so, yeah, we started talking about like, what do we do? How do we create together? How do we bring together the women we love to create together? And so with conversations with Dean Valerie Kinlock, you know, she really encouraged us to take this pathway of doing this special issue. And also, of course, being one of our elders and sisters and, you know, mentors and uplifters in this work helped us build that pathway towards that. So I really have to shout out Dean Kinlock for the ways that she made this work possible, as so many of our elders have done, and created these pathways that are not just about them, but about us. So yeah, I don't know, Mónica, if you want to jump in to talk a little bit about the theoretical threads and whatnot that we founded this work on.
Yeah, so I think what we found as we started talking about our work, and then these kind of, we would develop these like panels, right? That's how I feel like this momentum started, where it'd be like, you know, in this cohort, it'd be like me, Tracy, Dywanna, and Grace, and we'd like have this traveling panel to these different conferences. And we would like, we just, every time we did it, we created this space that like was so fueling for us. And we're like, who are the people that we're citing? Who are our mentors? Who are our sisters in other disciplines who are doing this work? And how do we bring, like, first, you know, we're like, how do we add them to the panel? And then we're like, that, I think talking with, you know, Dr. Kinlock, where she's like, do a special issue, bring all these people together. And so one of the things that we realized was so central to this kind of collective was the orientation that we were taking, being grounded in women of color feminist epistemologies, being grounded in you know, the ways that women of color approach research and collaborations and partnerships with young people, young women, girls, non-binary, youth of color, and how that makes this work distinct. And so what we wanted to do with the special issue was not only bring the people who are doing the work together, but to really make it, you know, really a focal point of the issue was recognizing that the way we do this is through these feminist lens, these women of color feminist approaches to literacy research. And we did it in an urban education, right, kind of broader journal in the field, because, you know, oftentimes we're like, do people understand what literacy is broadly in the field? And oftentimes it's limited to reading and writing. And when you take a women of color feminist approach, it's so much beyond that, right? And we're doing this through girls and women and non-binary youth of color. So I'll stop there, but anyone else, please chime in on kind of like this, the momentum of getting our collective together.
I think what I love about each of the spaces that were created is that I find that research can be used to hide things, right? The goal of research is to be transparency. But if done in a way, you can hide who the researcher is. We go through this myth of subjectivity, like, objectivity, that, we're not there. And I love that each of the women were wholly present in their work. You could not only see their words, you could feel their spirit. And I think that's what makes these spaces so unique. They become healing for us, yes, but they become sanctuary for others, because we're saying we see you, we love you, we know you, we're fighting beside you. And in that way, it becomes a reciprocal, liberatory, and healing space, which is just necessary right now.
I just want to jump off of that point. I think that like one of the things that I have always, from the moment we started we started these conversations, but then when we started having these panels, they were panels where we like cried in front of our audiences, where we were just like cheering each other on, where we were touching, like holding on to each other, physically holding on to each other, as well as like emotionally holding on to each other as we did these presentations. And that was such a gift, I think, to us, but I can't tell you how many people would come up to us, especially young women scholars of color, who would come up to us after the panels and thank us for making a space that was different than the rest. You think about ARA and what it looks like, and how many of those rooms are just these cold spaces. And to be able to be emotional and loving and joyful and express our hurt, like what Dywanna said about showing our full selves, that we are both joyful and we are hurt and we are growing. That was something that was really powerful for me and remains powerful for me. And I think, like, if anything, that fullness of self is something that I want to continue to bring to the Academy and push back on all of those forces that say that we cannot be that full self. So yeah, I don't know. I just can't stop expressing my gratitude to these women for, whether they've been on panels with me or whether I've, been touched by their work through these conversations, through their words on the page, as well as the art that they create, and the spirit that they bring to this work. I think that this is what we need to be doing.
In your article, you mentioned that Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz cited Dr. Jamil Liskot, who we've worked with here on the podcast. She mentioned, or she asked, I should say, what are we fighting for? What are we fighting against? And kind of this interesting dualism there. As a community, how did you, when you were working on the special issue, navigate both a critique of anti-Blackness and white heteropatriarchy, and center the joy and genius of girls and femmes of color?
I think one of the things we are fighting for, and one of the things that it wasn't even just the goal, but it was the process as well, is collectivism, community, sisterhood, and figuring out what are the ways that we invite multiple voices to be in chorus with one another. And that was, thinking about like not only, so what is sisterhood? What is sistership? It's not just this parallel thing, but it's also like thinking about the generational work. We had early career scholars as well as advanced career, like our mentors. And we were very purposeful in the ways that we were thinking about how do we bring this collective of voices to say something about the visioning of what we're fighting for and what we're fighting against, both from the voices of scholars who are newer to the field, who are beginning to delve into this work and figure out what is academia, what is education, what are all these systems, as well as our mentors who have been in the field and who have seen so much, who have been engaged in this fight and, you know, opened up the pathways for us to continue the fight now. So I think collectivity and loving collectivity was one of the things that we were both fighting for and fighting with, right? Like we're using that as one of our tools to create something more. But I do want to just kind of throw this over to Dr. Brown, if you're okay with that, because I think like one of the things that as we talk about, you know, the joy and genius of girls of color, this is so rooted in the work of Ruth Nicole Brown and the work that she has done to celebrate genius of Black girls. So I would love if, you know, you would talk a little bit about some of what you've been doing and across time and now, and what that means for you.
Let me just say that for those listening, like I'm so aware, and why I said yes to be on this conversation is to witness, like we are already in the future. The game has already changed. I remember being a McNair scholar saying I wanted to become a professor to transform the institution. And every time I'm with you all, it's like the game has changed. The institution has been transformed. This, what you all are making, like I didn't know about the panels. So I'm coming in, there's so many routes, multiplicities already at work, and how you all are creating this cipher. And it is so generative. It is everything that you speak. I'm like, how did you all know how to do this? Like the invitation one to participate, it's like always a yes when Monica and Grace ask anything. Like, and if I can't, I know I'm missing out on the best of what this work is. It's expanded, you know, how I'm thinking about Black girlhood literacies and what is possible. And so I'm just also in awe, and again, just so honored, levitated every time I'm in this conversation, because I'm like, yes, more of this, more of this, more of this, more of this, more Nora, more Dywanna, more Monica, more Grace. Like this is what it should be. And part of the joy for me is putting into some words how good this is. Like to know that somebody is asking you to do something and they do want the fullness of you. It's something beyond joy. Like, it's like, this is, I can resonate. It's a vibe, it's a teaching, it's a lesson you don't want to miss. And when I started my work, I came to it out of a bit of a refusal. Yeah, a lot of a refusal, actually, not a bit. Of disciplinarity, refusing disciplinarity. I was trained as a political scientist, and the way that I was trained to be with Black girls was in service of a disciplinary concept called political socialization. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that relation. I spent an entire postdoc year reworking that relation. If I was going to say yes to the academy, I said I would see Black girlhood as the whole of it all. So you would have to come through Black girlhood with Black girls to ask whatever question you thought was important. And we would do physics in Soul Hot. We would do whatever it was that you were curious about. You would have to go through Black girlhood to come up with some answer, and us as a community would establish the criteria if it was a legitimate, worthwhile, interesting question to pursue. And I wrote, I'm thinking of Gwendolyn Brooks' work. I was positively obsessed with the work. And what I ended up writing about was the questions that kept me up at night. What I was learning about Black girlhood, the ways in which we couldn't get to the celebration because of the white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist, heteropatriarchy, and also what I'm writing about now, which is the joy, because I'm still encouraged in my search for finding the words of how good it is when you got 50 Black girls in the space in Columbia, South Carolina, doing the Bati dance, celebrating their genius, breaking it down. I mean, it doesn't, for me, that is everything. And so I'm so glad that your gifts make a way for you. And I guess for those listening, when I was working on Black Girlhood, I didn't know how it would sort of be received. I just know that this was my work to do. And so to watch Black Girlhood become central to girls of color, become central to foundation missions, school missions, and national initiatives, international programs. I mean, that's really exciting. And as long as I know I'm with these folks right here on this call, you know, my job is now to just say yes, okay?
I just want to say thank you so much to Ruth Nicole for being such an amazing mentor. And I think everything that she has said and has taught us is reflective of this kind of what we were building in the issue is this intergenerational model, right? Like not only us capturing how we learn from the work of our mentors, but capturing the beauty of that mentorship. Like, I love you, Ruth Nicole. I love all the women in this special issue, and hearing you, you know, talk about these transformations and these new ways of doing and being, you know, in the academy, and centering Black girls and Black girl joy and Black girl genius. Like, I just want to center that, and center how much that teaches us, right, collectively. But yes, I just felt compelled to say thank you.
I love you too, Monica. And I just think that is, don't miss the revolution in that, because when Black women, when women of color say, I love you out loud to each other, you know, we get in our whole lives and the earth shakes in the direction of our greatest, most just futures. So yes.
Just want to say again, I love all of you, because that's the revolution.
So I'm sitting here, and I know you can see me like darting away, because of course I had to pick up my pen and like start writing. Ruth got me all up in my head, like, and just I'm sitting here like channeling Yoli, thinking about her Peace Chronicles and thinking about the phrases that we keep saying over, this fullness of you, and how powerful that is. And I'm like, it's transformative when individuals can see and love the fullness of you, when resonating frequencies, where my soul gets to make a melody with yours in love, in these joyful spaces where I can lay my thoughts nakedly before you without fear of any proprietary judgment. I just get to be loved thickly, completely, in my full humanity. I get to be at peace. And that is the research that we need. We need research to create joy and peace in individuals.
Kind of building off that and thinking about how everyone has been coming together in sisterhood and lifting each other up and acknowledging the fullness of each other. In the article, We Are Our Only Way Forward, you talk about fostering like a transparency and an urgency to look harder within yourselves, holding each other accountable and acknowledging what is missing from the conversations within the oppressive contexts of anti-Blackness and white heteropatriarchy. We would love to know, how did you navigate the coming together in community and this holding each other accountable? And do you have advice for teachers and scholars trying to come together and do similar work in the way that you all have done in such a sustaining and joyful way?
Thank you for that question. I've been thinking a lot about that, mainly because obviously you posed that for us, but I think it's always part of the implications, the futurities of the work. How does this work? How do we make it sustainable? And it's important. It's been important for me as someone that is a practitioner of teaching ethnic studies, gender studies through writing. I teach about 180 to 200 students per semester. That's my reality as a lecturer, that I think, and so it was very important for me to be able to bring, it was very important to have this opportunity with this special issue to actually reflect on some of that. And I also teach the high school students at the Indigenous Preparatory School. And so I think I'm always thinking about how do we how are we nurturing the space? How is the space being used? And I think students always remind me, right? Like, don't get it twisted, profe. They're like, this is very real. Writing is activism. Writing is immediate, it's tangible way of expressing that love. It's an immediate way of challenging those logics of settler colonialism, and it happens in the classroom. And so my advice for educators, for those seeking to do this, to nurture writing, to nurture and see, one is to see students as writers immediately, right? Every student that walks in, right, whether they see themselves as writers or not, those are writers for us, right? And I think as educators, we oftentimes may forget that if we're overwhelmed with work. But I think first and foremost, right, and I wrote that in my article, the first premise of it is that Indigenous students, Indigenous girls are writers and they're writing. And so, you know, just having that premise is very important as an educator, making space within the class for writing, even if that means less lecturing, even if that means less slides. It's really absolutely important, imperative to make that space for you to write as an educator in community with students. And I think that's, you know, whether it means reframing office hour as student hour, as a student writing cafe that students can drop in, and whatever you're writing, this is our space. Whatever I'm writing, this is my time as a writer, and you're invited. So I think it's, I mean, I could go on about this for a while, but I think actively creating those spaces within the class time, and then reorienting other sort of academic traditional practices as space to honor them as writers is very important.
Yeah, I love that. All of that, just all of that, Nora. I think that, you know, honoring ourselves in this work has been so foundational, honoring each other. I don't know, Monica, you can talk a little bit more about this if you want to, but I think that within the editorial process, even of putting together this issue, we wanted to make sure that we were honoring everyone's voice who was coming to this space. And that meant like really rebelling against some of the ways that the editorial process is done in academia, right? It was a very considered, thoughtful process of who are we getting to review? How are we inviting those reviewers to this process? How are we setting up standards for how the reviewers are going to approach the work? You know, we weren't just going to send these articles off to anyone. We were going to send them off to people, women of color. All of our reviewers were women of color who were going to hold this work as sacred, hold the people, the humans behind the words as sacred. So this was a thoughtful, considered process where we not only invited those women to review these pieces, but then also sent how we expected them to approach the work with that sacredness, with the humanity of the writers in mind always. And that was so important. Like Monica, we have experienced this. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced, you know, the violence that the editorial process can do to you. As a woman of color, as someone who does not conform, who does bring the fullness of the self to the writing, how violent the process can be. And so we said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this different. And we're going to invite folks, women specifically, women of color specifically, to engage this work in a way that is going to be centered on love of the word, of the ideas, of the memories, of the human in the writing, of the self in the writing.
I'm going to be transparent in this one, and who I was coming to this, because I was coming to this as someone who has been beaten down for her writing, because I'm an ethnopoet. I cannot let poetry go. And I was just typing in a chat, you know, I've been told a number of times that poetry is not academic enough. So I was terrified to be in this space because I'd been bruised and battered so many other times. I did not want to release my words to the world, even though I know they're needed. And I was greeted with such grace and with such love. And I just remember, like, the first email I received, it's like, your beautiful work. There is space for you. We need this. And just having those 3 sentences to compete with and just like to take over the constant state of rejection, because not only you want my story, but you want my story to be told in a particular fashion so that it fits your framework. And I mean, like, poetry is the music of my heart. And my stories, if we consider our stories the cadence of our lives, then you have me walking to your own rhythm and I can't even dance to my purpose, right? And I think that's what happens. So what happens in academia is akin to what happens in the classroom of, you want me to be a formula. And when my life doesn't fit to your formula, then you don't know how to approach me. You don't know how to see me. You don't know how to affirm me. So therefore, you sure as heck don't know how to love me. And I think that is what was different. We were each seen, we were each valued. It was not, how can we get this to fit to an academic space, but how can academia expand so that it sees you and your work?
I did. I shared through writing in the chat that I had experienced a lot of wounding of the spirit, as Dr. Smith also mentioned, with previous writing opportunities, because of many reasons for the integration. I've integrated creative, or I have elevated creative writing, and my intersecting identities in writing as an educational research, and that wasn't always met very kindly. And so I think it's been hard for me to find spaces where to fit the writing, and that's within the constraints of my everyday work and my everyday obligations. So I approached this with a bit of a trauma, to be quite honest. I was, when I received the invitation, but the collective spirit that was offered, I think the fact that the first email was, how are you doing? Right? Like, I think even like the questions that were posed asking me, how was my body? How was my soul? There's this opportunity, this is how we're going to approach it. That immediately felt very different. I was offered grace and flexibility, right? We were in a pandemic as we were continuing to write. And I knew I would be asking for grace and flexibility at some point as a mother scholar, as a caretaker. And I think it was just pedagogically, that was the modeling that was there. And I really wish that this is something that, again, you could see it, and it was very different. So I wanted to share that, even those initial communications asking about how we were doing, letting us know there was flexibility and grace. That was amazing.
You know, you ask about advice to scholars, educators, et cetera. I think that, you know, the biggest thing that I have to say, maybe it's not the biggest thing, this is one thing I have to say. One of the ways that we move forward, that we recreate, is being like kind, you know? I'm so tired of like people, especially in these kind of anonymous review systems, of being really cruel for no reason. You know, I think it is within our frameworks, within these women of color traditions of lifting as we climb, that we must work with. Because I'm so sick of people being cruel, not only to the writers, but to the traditions on which we build, to the citational practices that we have. I'm really sick of the cruelty. So I don't know, I think that as I think about what I would say to other scholars is be kind, be human, recognize each other, see each other, think about what you are saying. How are you holding people with grace and love, especially when it is work that is dedicated to some of our most marginalized youth, to our most marginalized communities? Like, love on these folks, don't tear them down, because we're doing the work. And I'm sure listeners who are listening to the words coming out of these women's mouth recognize how beautiful they are. So think about what it means to enter a review process or an editorial process, and what you do to the humans who are writing and who are giving so much of themselves, the fullness of themselves, when you enter that process with cruelty.
Yeah, I think as co-editors, like, every time we got a new draft of these beautiful manuscripts, we just like learned so much. Like we learned so much from each of the authors. We learned so much from putting the dialogue piece together and being in conversation with mentors and junior scholars. And like that transformed like what we thought like an editorial process looked like, or what a review process could look like. I remember sitting there in a conversation being like a puzzle. Which two reviewers are going to really uplift this piece? Which two reviewers are going to and it's like they came back doing just what we thought they would do. They saw the voices, they saw these ideas that were there in the piece, and they said, I want to hear more about that. And it wasn't egocentric. It wasn't this like, who are you citing? It was like, this is beautiful as it is. I want more, and that I think was like, we learned so much about what a review process could look like. And then also just like the content of like, these are our educators, these are our teachers, these are who we're in community with, are teaching us so much about theory, about methods, about praxis. And I'm just super grateful that I had the opportunity to like continue to learn. Like this was such a transformative learning process because of the writing and the kind of soul pouring that went into every single part of the process.
In terms of seeing all the scholars and all the students who come through this, I wanted to think a little bit about gender in We Are Our Only Way Forward. You mentioned that Dr. Carol Brochin explained how centering the joy and genius of girls of color does require a more expansive understanding of gender. How do all of you see the work that needs to be done in our field to hold space for masked girls, queer boys, trans girls who have felt excluded from what has been constructed as girl spaces, and at the same time feel the weight of toxic masculinity in boy spaces? I know, Dr. González Ybarra, you were talking about the importance of bringing non-binary students of color into the fold here.
I think that the question that Carol brought up, when I remember being in the dialogue space and all of us who had been conceptualizing our work and theorizing our work in this particular way, like, again, another moment, right? Like where Carol became this mentor educator that was like, let's talk about this. Like, let's bring this to the table. And what does this mean for our work and how we frame this issue or how we frame this conversation? And a lot of us had to do some reflecting on how we're thinking about girlhood and how the theories that we're working from actually lend a lot of, so much space for us to rethink, right? And are calling us to rethink identities related to gender and sexuality that resist binaries and patriarchy. Yeah, Ruth Nicole, you were talking about this too with your work and how you're thinking about, youth as they enter the spaces that you're creating. What do you think?
It was really important for me that the call be 2 Black girls, 4 Black girls. And in starting that work, a lot of times we were met with, actually, no, you can't do that. For a variety of reasons. Boys were more important, was usually the number one reason why we couldn't do that. But also the response to So Hot calling for Black girls, we were also met with a lot of, we have not been called before. You mean this is 4 Black girls? That was new to a lot of spaces, honestly. I mean, it operated on different levels, the institutional levels, where you could put on a poster what those names mean. But for us, we were always from the start thinking about Black girlhood as a beyond an identity, but also as a political space where we understood gender is fluid, sexuality is fluid, and those things would be in conversation and negotiated. And they often were, as soon as you step in, where I have stories where a Black girl, for example, would show up with her white girl best friend. And she was like, can she come? And she was telling us why she needed to be there. And the thing was, in So Hot, anybody could come. It was always an open space. We had girls who came with, their friend who was a boy, but in their words, acted more like a girl. We're in middle school, so I'm talking 6th grade. This is the language they gave us. It was like, yes, nobody has ever been turned away. And I think it's interesting the way that they theorize Black girlhood as this political space, and who is against that. Because let me be real, like there are folks who are like, oh, is this for Black girls? It can't be, it can't be, for whatever reason they think it can't be. And there are all those who show up with Black girls as Black girls. I also want to be very clear that the beauty of working intergenerationally, multi-generationally is like folks' identities have also changed over time. And, for reasons that you may not know or may not appear to you on the surface, the way that folks hold a space for Black girlhood in context of different gender appearances has been really sacred to me. So I have had folks who say, I may not look like a Black girl to you, but let me tell you about how I identify with Black girlhood, or let me tell you about this time when I was a Black girl and I want to keep that space sacred. The complexity, the differences we acknowledge from the start, and we know that those are always valuable.
Yeah, I think that nod towards complexity, and thinking about how do I open spaces for complexity, for shifting, for hybridity, for, fluidity, all of this stuff, in the ways that I conceive of girlhood, of gender, of, all of these categories, which I do think are I think we can talk about girlhood or girlhood of color, Black girlhood, whatever the category is. And we can lay that on top of, these very strict binary categories, or we can say what more is there? I love this idea of girlhood of color or Black girlhood as a political category. I think even when we think about the category of women of color, that is a political category, right? We talk about that in the piece. So what does it mean to conceptualize that not as this strict thing of womanhood that reiterates these binaries, reiterates this heteropatriarchal conception, these racist conceptions of what womanhood of color is, but instead see it as something that is complex, that is nuanced, that is shifting. And, in ourselves, it is work that I continue to do. And I'll be very honest about that. I have to continue to think about, are there ways that when I create a group for a research project or for, an educative purpose, am I, in the ways that I talk about it or invite folks in, am I doing the same things that I'm trying to resist? So it's work that is ongoing. And I hope to continue to learn from, even Carol, months before we even started the special issue, she had reached out to me because I had put out a flyer and she was like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you about this. And what does it mean when you say girlhood? Because, and she did it in such a loving way too, that made me feel yes, this is the work I need to pursue. This is the work I need to continue to question rather than just shutting down or feeling attacked. Carol invited me to think about this. And that's what we need to continue to do, right? It's that growth that is really beautiful. And what I think that we're all kind of talking about here is that collaborative forward movement of visioning and thinking about what do we mean when we say girlhood of color.
We need to interrogate where the origins of the questions come from, be it brain or heart. And I know so much of education centers learning beginning with the brain, right? Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I just reject that. I'm going to, I pull on my African notions of being, and I think about Ubuntu, and I am because we are, right? So if I do not recognize, acknowledge, and love the various permutations of girlhood and in all of its complexities, then I am doing the same thing to others that was done to me, right? And, to resist that, that's kind of what's needed. So I think if we center learning as and teaching as an act of love, something that must start with the heart. Like if your heart ain't right, you can't do this work. You're going to be creating residual traumas. So there has to be an interrogation of self, but it's also different, which is why now when I begin my classes, it's what is love to you? And after we have that discussion, then I need to have a cold, hard conversation with you about how do you need to be loved? Because I know throughout this semester, that's going to change. And especially as we are in a pandemic, how you need to be loved is so vitally important. And I didn't think it was such I'm like, okay, I'm learning from my sister, so let me take this in my space. And then I asked the question about what text brings you joy. And my students looked at me and they said, I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Like why it was a defense mechanism. Like, why do you want to know what brings me joy? And I'm like, because we're going to be doing hard work, and hard work is easier on a text of joy. So whatever the text is, if I don't have it read, then guess what? I got reading to do. I got work to do because I need to know you and I need to love you in the way that you need to be loved. And so I see this collective, I see this writing, I see this as a model for a different way of loving learning. And we cannot, and we try so hard to remove the love from the classroom, and it's to our detriment. We got to start doing the heart work that is the hard work.
Dywanna, you're always just flooring me because this is, the hard work is the hard work. And I think this is hard work. What we're doing is hard work. It could not be done without the hard work, without the love, without the consideration of how we question, how we push, how we transform ourselves. In the article we talk about, we have to clean house. Cleaning house is hard, but when we do it in that loving way, supported by one another, and I just think about my friendship, my sisterhood with Mónica, how many times we are on the phone, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this thing because I don't know how I'm gonna survive if I don't talk this out with you. And my sister who I just love so much, and I couldn't be here and I couldn't do the work without Mónica, without Dywanna, without Ruth Nicole, without Nora. This is life-changing and survival and thriving work because it's so joyful and full of love. And I just can't even imagine where I would be without the work, the love, the joy that's brought forth through the sisterhood, which I think is a different model and a necessary model, what we do here.
I love you too. I love all of you. And I think this is what I want to do, right? More of this. And because we're doing it together. And that has been the most significant for me piece of it, right? Being able to do this and do it our way, I'm thinking about when we submitted, me and Grace, we sat on Zoom and or FaceTime and we submitted the special issue and we just celebrated and cried and we're how did this happen? How did we do this? How did we get here? And we got here because of y'all. We got here because we've been doing this work and we've been doing it together. And this collectiveness is what fuels me. It fuels me to stay and do this work because in the reality, right? We could do this work outside of the academy, right? It may look different, but this is where we are. This is where, for some reason, we're doing it here together, collectively, right? And, I think of this idea, I think Grace and I, some people were oh, should you be editing a special issue now? That's a lot of work for junior scholars. And we were kind of yeah, we don't care. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it because we have support and because we have love behind it. This and the way that it's been love at the center of every step of the way it's been circulated, the way it's been loved back has just been so powerful. And it's so reflective of the relationships, the new relationships, the long-standing relationships, the way that love has been unfolding. And that to me has been like, this is what I want to do. Like, you know, and this is what I'm going to privilege with my time. Right. And I don't, you know, whatever happens, you know, or how I'm positioned in the academy, like that really doesn't matter to me so long that I get to continue to do this work and be in community with these amazing women.
And I want to add one more thing to that. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about like so much of the good theory that we build on, it arises because we like chat, because we gossip, because we, you know, share chismes, you know, like that is where the theory is coming out. It is not like this abstract thing that I mean, yes, we get it from our beautiful books and like the reading and the like texts that bring us joy and movement, but also so much of the way that like I have come to understand what we did in this issue is through sisterhood and through the like side chats, the like hours that we spent on the phone, like talking just about whatever, not necessarily like, oh, like let's do the work of special. Like anytime Mónica and I like would get together to like do the editorial stuff, we would spend like 30 minutes first just talking. And like that was so foundational to the good work that happened. And like, how do we want to be treated? How do we replicate what we're doing here within the whole process? And that's really important, I think, in the ways that we continue to think about like, how do we like do this work lovingly, joyfully? It's think about how you learn. You learn when you are in love. You learn when you are in sisterhood. You learn when you are in companionship. When the heart work is there, you learn so much better, as Dywanna said. So yeah, I think that's something I really want to emphasize, especially to like scholars who are coming to this work. You need to figure out like, how do you love and how do you feel beautiful and wonderful and happy as you are doing the work, because that will sustain it and make it better.
Maybe just to build on that and to connect that to our last question, do all of you have any advice or invitations to graduate students, teachers, artists, extended family who want to join in this heart work and hard work?
I'll start just by saying, find your people, find your loved ones who see you, honor you, love you, and that you love, because that's where the work, the real work, the beautiful work, the generative work happens. You can't do this alone. As much as the academy tells you that this is, you know, an individualistic, capitalistic system, like, no, we survive because we have each other, and we always have.
My advice is just to keep knowing what you know, and to grow that thing from what has been planted in you, what is yours to express. Give it 100%, do it all out, and everything that you are seeking will find you. I know that. Plus, love you guys.
I think my advice would be a combination of what Dr. Player and Dr. Dywanna Smith have already shared about seeking your community, right, or your given or chosen family, and finding and keeping the texts that bring you joy. I would combine that to advise students, graduate students, whatever department, whatever major, whatever division, whatever your PhD or master's aspirations are, don't lose sight of that literary community, right? So a real in-person physical community. But if you are studying chemistry or anything that's not related, but you love that poetry, but you love reading an autobiography by Assata Shakur, right? Don't read that just because it's not in the canon of what you're studying. So hold on to, especially women of color, femmes of color writers, even if it's not in your discipline. So maybe traditionally the advice is read only within, or read within education. We know we know that as graduate students, you are bombarded with texts, with canons. Make sure you protect your sacred text, right? The texts that bring you love, the community that brings you love, even if that's like the literary community.
I love that. And so I'm just gonna build on what Nora said and just root yourself in thick love. Like, you know, Toni Morrison says, thin love ain't love at all. So all of the examples of thick love, be it in text, be it in pictures, be it in videos, be it in actual the spirits of people, like whomever they are. Root yourselves and ground yourselves, because the work that we're doing, the spaces that we are in to make change, they demand that you sacrifice your integrity and yourself to achieve status. So redefine what is success to you, and know that success may not take the traditional look that America throws at us, and that's fine, because that's not success anyway. So yeah, root yourself in thick love and just interrogate, what makes you successful.
I think I echo what all of y'all are saying. And I think my advice would be, right, like this academy, the ugliness of it, like the competitiveness, the egocentricness of all of it, like it doesn't have to be this way, right? And it continues to serve particular kinds of scholars doing particular forms of work and being a certain way in the academy that is actually like counter, is in contrast to what the approach that we're calling for, right? And so like, I really encourage graduate students to be about the collective, really embrace that idea of the collective, because if you let yourself get bound up in the ugly of it, right? Not only is it harmful to yourself and your spirit, but it's harmful to like that collective work that's really trying to resist and transform what this could be, because it could look different, right? We're seeing it in pockets, we're practicing it in pockets, but we're waiting for everyone to join this collective, right? And if the ugly kind of keeps taking some of us, right, then like it's not going to transform, and we're going to continue having these super traumatic review processes and these traumatic kind of experiences in the academy that are just really reflections of white heteropatriarchy and settler colonialism. And so all of that, is going to just continue to be perpetuated. And so I think, yeah, just commit to the collective and be okay with being, in this new way of doing the academy.
And I just want to say one more thing, specifically to, women of color scholars. White heteropatriarchy teaches us that we have to be the only one in the room because that's the way it has worked. That is not the model that we're striving for. We're not competing against each other. That is not the goal, is competition. The goal is like to bring as many more of us into the room as possible. So as we approach these universities, these institutions, these publications, like think about, how do I make sure I'm not competing with my sisters? I am making sure that like I am getting there so that I can bring everyone else in. And so like competition is white heteropatriarchy. So like get rid of it, like bring each other in.